It all began when I was 7, which feels like a lifetime ago, 20 years to be exact. As a curious child, I spent my days exploring my family's vast land, trekking through the grassy fields to the woods beyond. I would collect rocks, observe animals, and splash around in the streams I discovered, often alone. I didn't mind solitude. In fact, I never felt lonely, perhaps because I was accustomed to it. My parents owned a sprawling farm that extended for miles in every direction, surrounded by beautiful countryside. The golden sun illuminated the acres of vibrant green cornstalks lining our backyard. My father worked diligently, tending to the crops with the assistance of a few farmhands, while my mother managed the household and made occasional trips into town for supplies. They were a strong team, deeply in love and reliant on each other. During the school year, either my mother or my friend Trevor would take me into town for lessons, alternating days. Trevor, my only friend, and a boy my age, lived 8 miles down the dirt road and was often tied up with his own chores during the summer. Occasionally, our parents would gather for a hearty country dinner while Trevor and I devoured our food before racing outside to play. I was a happy child, content with my life, and I don't recall ever feeling a sense of separation or lasting sadness. My parents treated me well, and the expansive land around us kept my adventurous spirit alive. We lived on a single-lane country road, far from town and everything else. Behind our ranch-style house lay the cornfields, with rows of stalks stretching toward the horizon. I often worried about getting lost in that green maze when I had to fetch my dad for supper, the towering stalks looming over me. In front of the house, a vast expanse of flat grassland spread out for dozens of acres before giving way to a dense tree line where the woods thrived. I loved exploring those woods, spending most of my summers delving deeper into their sap-crusted depths. But this story isn't about the woods or the cornfields. It's about the house that suddenly appeared across the street. I was 7 when it materialized out of nowhere. I remember going to bed on a hot June night, sleep elusive due to the oppressive heat. When sleep finally came, it was short-lived. I awoke in the middle of the night, my throat dry from the thick air. As I went to get a glass of water, I caught sight of it for the first time through my bedroom window. The house was strikingly tall, 3 stories reaching for the star-filled sky. It was the largest house I had ever seen. My small hands gripped the windowsill, and my nose pressed against the glass as I took in this new wonder. It stood just across the dirt road from our house, only a couple of 100 feet from our front porch. Painted dark green, or so I would see in the morning light, it appeared well maintained. The dark windows were framed by ghastly yellow shutters, which looked like mold in the stillness of the moonlight. There was no porch, just a single unattractive door that matched the shutters. I stared in awe, my young mind racing with excitement at this new mystery, already envisioning a day filled with exploration. But of course I couldn't. That was someone's house, and someone lived there. As my thoughts drained my energy, I felt a strong urge to wake my parents and share my discovery. The sudden appearance of a house across from ours was fascinating, not frightening or strange. My 7-year-old mind simply accepted it as a natural occurrence. Eventually, I fetched a glass of water and returned to bed, my mind buzzing with possibilities. The next morning, I sprang out of bed, the sun just beginning to warm the sky with deep purple and soft pink hues. I rushed to my window to confirm that I hadn't been dreaming. The house still stood, dark and silent. I bolted into the kitchen, nearly colliding with my dad, eager to show my parents my discovery. It felt like my own personal finding, as if I were somehow responsible for its existence. After my dad scolded me, likely annoyed by my burst of early morning energy, I asked him if he had seen the house. He didn't seem to understand what I was talking about, as I eagerly tugged him toward the front door, my words spilling out like a dirt bike revving its engine. I flung the door open and pointed to the house, my feet pattering down the steps of our porch. My father paused in the doorway, scanning the field with a look of confusion on his face. He glanced down at me with concern before turning his attention back to the field. Scratching his chin, he gestured for me to come inside, telling me to stop being ridiculous. If I had this much energy, he said, I could help him out in the fields that day. He couldn't see the house. At that age, I struggled to comprehend this. After all, it was right there. I kept pointing and explaining, but my words fell on deaf ears. He was blind to it, and that left me feeling angry and confused. I didn't understand why he couldn't see what was so obvious to me. I desperately wanted him to recognize the discovery I had made in the middle of the night, but no matter how much I insisted, it was futile. As a result, I spent the day helping my dad in the cornfields. Shortly after breakfast, 3 of the regular farmhands arrived, and we headed out back to begin our day's work. If they could see the house, they showed no sign of it. I even asked Louis, the farmhand who had been helping my dad the longest, if he noticed anything unusual on his way in. He ruffled my hair and said that seeing me up this early was the only noteworthy thing he'd seen. Frustrated, I shook him off, growing angry that no one else seemed to acknowledge the house. As I went about my chores, I couldn't shake the thought of that house from my mind. It loomed quietly in the long grass, its 3 levels beckoning for exploration. I wanted to tell Trevor about it, but I knew I wouldn't be able to today. He would believe me. I was certain of it. Trevor shared my sense of adventure, and I knew that when we played together next, our time would be filled with discussions about the house and maybe even sneaking around it. There was an air of wonder surrounding it that almost physically pulled me toward it. Even though I couldn't see it from my spot among the corn, I could pinpoint its location from any vantage point. The sun dragged itself across the sky, each hour feeling like an eternity, until finally my dad announced it was time to call it a day. I walked back to our house beside him, listening as he discussed plans with the 3 workers about what needed to be done the next day and what time to return in the morning. They trudged up the back porch, where my mother greeted them with cold beers, which they accepted with broad smiles. Still feeling tired and slightly angry, I wandered around the side of our house, yearning for another glimpse of the green house with yellow shutters. When I turned the corner, I stopped dead in my tracks. The house was gone. I rubbed my eyes, convinced my mind was playing tricks on me. But when I opened them again, the field lay empty, the grass swaying like running water in the warm breeze. I turned completely around, searching in all directions, wondering if I had somehow misremembered its location. But all I saw was grass in front of me and corn behind me. I squinted at the distant tree line at the far end of the field, but nothing stood out. Frustrated, I kicked at the dry dirt, realizing that Trevor would never believe me now. I had wanted to show him so badly, desperate for someone to recognize this unexplainable phenomenon. In that moment, I remember cursing for the first time. Afterward, I nervously glanced around to ensure my mother hadn't heard me. Her voice floated toward me from the back porch, and I felt relief wash over me when I realized she was still there. So I cursed again, finding a strange sense of toughness in it. Sighing, I dejectedly shoved my hands into my pockets and leaned back to gaze at the evening sky. Dark storm clouds rolled in from the west, where Trevor and his parents lived. I watched as the billowing black clouds piled atop one another, feeling the air shiver as distant thunder rumbled. Later that night, the storm reached us. Rain pounded against the walls, and lightning split the sky. The blinding white flashes followed closely by the booming sound of thunder. I sat in my bed, feeling a little afraid, contemplating whether to go into my parents' room. My dad was probably sleeping through the whole thing, but my mom might still be awake. I didn't want them to know I was scared, though. After all, I was 7 now. As another bone-shaking blast of thunder crashed down from the sky, I slid out of bed and approached my window, forcing myself to confront the source of my fear. My dad always told me that brave men only become courageous when they face the things that make them want to run away. So I planted my feet firmly in front of the window and watched as nature unleashed its fury around me. The wind howled, causing the house to tremble, and I listened to the rain slam against the roof, sounding like 1,000 galloping hooves. Another bolt of lightning illuminated the landscape, its sudden brightness causing me to blink. Then I saw it again, the house. I hurriedly cupped my face against the glass, straining to see through the rain-streaked pane. I could make out its shape, a dark square hole cut into the night, and I waited for another flash of lightning. My heart raced, joy bubbling up inside me. It was back. I knew I hadn't imagined it. I wanted to run and tell my parents, to loudly exclaim that I wasn't wrong, that there was indeed a house across from us. But the thought of waking my father in the middle of the night kept me rooted in my room. After a few tense minutes, another flash lit up the world, and I focused on the house for the brief second it was illuminated. The front door stood wide open. For reasons I couldn't quite understand, fear began to creep into my mind. I knew something was wrong. People don't leave their front doors open in the middle of a storm. Yet there it was, completely ajar, rain and wind pushing through into the dark interior. Unease twisted in my stomach, and I swallowed hard, suddenly aware of every shadow in my room. I gripped the windowsill, waiting for more lightning. Moments later, it came, revealing something standing in the doorway, staring straight at me. It was blurred by the storm, but I could tell it was big and resembled a swirl of colors in human form. In an instant, I dove for my bed, my fleeting courage shattered, and buried myself deep under the covers. I lay there, shaking, feeling as if I had just witnessed something I wasn't supposed to see. The next day, the house was gone again. Part of me felt relieved, as it allowed my young mind time to process what I had seen. I replayed the scene over and over, my imagination filling in the details of the human-shaped blur. But whatever images I conjured were soon overshadowed by the reality that I had no clue what I had witnessed. I ate breakfast in the kitchen, listening to my parents discuss the day's plans. My ears perked up when my mom mentioned that the Harveys were coming over for supper. I would finally have the chance to tell Trevor everything. Excitement pushed away my lingering fears from the previous night, and I gobbled down my pancakes in a few bites. My father said he didn't need my help that day, so after assisting my mom with the dishes, I dashed out the front door toward the woods. With the house gone, it felt like just another beautiful summer day, bursting with opportunities. Should I go swimming? Build a fort? Maybe once Trevor arrived, we could play Lewis and Clark. Whooping and hollering, I raced across the grassy field toward the tree line. As I passed the spot where the mysterious greenhouse had stood, I pondered what would happen if it suddenly reappeared while I was running over its spot. Would I magically find myself inside, or would I be flung high into the sky as it shot up from the ground? Feeling a surge of nervousness, I quickened my pace and dashed over where it had rested. The day passed in a blur of thoughts and summer heat. I spent most of it splashing around in one of the streams, collecting rocks and pretending to fight pirates. It was one of those days that shaped how I look back on my childhood, where everything felt just right. A day filled with make-believe and excitement. As I lost myself in my fantasies, thoughts of the house faded further and further from my mind, burned away in the growing heat. The sun rose to a blistering peak before beginning its slow descent, painting the horizon in a pool of colors that mixed in the sky like melting popsicles. Not realizing how late it had gotten and feeling hungry, I threw the last of the rocks I had collected into the stream and started making my way back home. I wondered if Trevor and his parents had arrived yet. Looking up at the sky, I tried to gauge the time. My growling stomach indicated it had better be time to eat. I broke through the tree line and was about to sprint the rest of the way when I stopped dead in my tracks. The house was back, but something was different. The house was facing me. Dread crept across the ground and climbed up my legs. This wasn't right. It was supposed to be facing my house. Why was it turned this way now? I swallowed hard, my own house now obscured from view. I watched the dark, empty windows, searching for signs of life, for any indication of the thing I had seen in the storm. It was silent. I began to circle the house cautiously, keeping my eyes fixed on the front door as I walked. I half expected it to burst open and for some creature to come charging at me, but nothing moved. As I reached the halfway point around the house, I made a break for my front door. My legs kicked through the knee-high grass, shoes sinking into the soft earth as I tore my gaze away and focused on my goal. Panting, I climbed the steps, gulping in lungfuls of evening air. I turned around and nearly stumbled backward. The house was back, facing mine. I stared at it for a moment, gasping for air, waiting for something to happen. In my mind, the house felt alive, like some kind of living beast that was watching me. I didn't know what it wanted or what its intentions were, but I was starting to feel that it was dangerous. Turning away, I went inside, where I was met with a savory aroma. A gentle warmth filled the air with mouth-watering scents. I heard commotion in the kitchen, accompanied by the rolling laughter of conversation. As I walked into the dining room, my mother greeted me from the stove, reminding me that I had kept Trevor waiting. I mumbled my hellos to Trevor's parents, who smiled and returned my greeting before resuming their conversation with my parents, which I had interrupted. I headed to the bathroom to wash up, followed by Trevor, who was excitedly telling me about a fort he had been building in the woods near his house. I shared my own adventures from the day, and together we began to make plans for sleepovers at each other's homes, hoping that tonight would be one of those magical nights. As I dried my hands, I asked Trevor if he had noticed anything unusual on his way to my house. He looked confused, so I led him down the hall to the front door. I opened it and pointed to the greenhouse with the yellow blinds. Hesitantly, I asked him if he could see it. He laughed and slapped me on the back, saying, "Of course I can." Relief washed over me. Closing the door behind us and stepping out onto the porch, I began to share my strange experiences with the house in the field. His eyes widened, and a grin split his face in half. The more I talked, the more I saw his eyes light up with excitement. He asked if I had explored it yet, or poked around the outside to see if I could get inside. I shook my head fiercely, expressing the fear it emitted. I told him it didn't feel safe, that something was wrong with the house. I explained that my parents couldn't see it, and that something had been watching me in the rain. This only fueled his eagerness to explore it further. As I tried to talk him out of it, I heard my father call me to set the table. Groaning, I complied, and our conversation came to an abrupt halt. Trevor helped me fill the water glasses, and soon we were sitting around a table filled with hot food. I didn't care much about the meal in front of me. It was just a hurdle between Trevor and our playtime. Disregarding the hard work that had gone into the preparation, I dug in with fervor after my father said, "Grace." My mother shot me a look or two as I continued to stuff my face, washing it down with mouthfuls of water. When my plate was finally clear, I looked across the table and saw that Trevor was in the same mindset. I waited the proper amount of time and then asked if we could be excused. My father waved us away, commenting on my bad table manners, but I barely heard him as Trevor and I bolted for the front door. The sky stretched out in a stunning array of deep purples and blues as the sun dipped below the horizon, marking the end of the day. Stars twinkled above us like tiny lamps, their light pulsing in rhythm with the sounds of night creatures filling the air, serenading the celestial bodies. Trevor and I sat on the front steps, taking a moment to let our meal settle. We gazed at the dark house across the way, waiting for any sign of life. The moon illuminated the deepening darkness, casting a soft glow over the field, complemented by a sea of blinking fireflies. Trevor, bubbling with excitement, expressed his eagerness to peek through the windows, his bravado spilling over in bold declarations. I shook my head, sensing an unsettling malevolence surrounding the foreboding house. It was an instinctive feeling, a twisting unease in my stomach whenever I recalled the incident during the storm. After a futile attempt to dissuade me, Trevor declared he would venture out alone. I locked eyes with him, urgently voicing my objections, but no amount of pleading could sway him. He teased me, calling me a big chicken, and prancing around the porch, clucking and swinging his arms, but my resolve remained unchanged. With a sigh, Trevor ceased his antics and bounded down the steps into the grass. He winked at me and gave a thumbs up, dismissing my concerns as childish. As I watched him approach the house, my heart raced. I felt an overwhelming urge to stop him, to inform my parents, but I hesitated, knowing they would likely dismiss my fears and scold me instead. Trevor was now 30 feet from the house, his figure merely a dark silhouette against the fading light. I could hear him saying something, but the night swallowed his words. As he closed the distance to 20 feet, his pace slowed. My mouth went dry, and dread rose in my throat. This was a terrible idea. I clenched my fists, feeling the sweat on my palms. 10 feet from the door, the atmosphere was eerily quiet. The house loomed like a giant, its yellow shutters resembling grimy teeth, the sickly hue standing out in the darkness. Trevor cautiously approached the front door, aiming for a first-floor window. Then, something caught my eye in the third-floor window on the far left of the house. A soft glow flickered like a candle amidst the dense darkness. It wavered in the middle of the window before moving. I watched in horror as the light traveled from window to window, then vanished. In a panic, I shouted for Trevor to come back, racing down the stairs toward the field. He was just about to peer into the window when he heard me, turning back and taking a few steps in my direction. I crossed the road and kicked through the long grass, waving my arms frantically for him to return. The light was now on the second floor, its glow easily visible as it hovered past the windows, drawing nearer. Terrified to advance any further, I shifted nervously from foot to foot, my heart pounding in my chest, my face twisted in fear. Trevor called out, asking what was wrong. I screamed for him to come back, warning him that something was approaching and that he was in danger. In a moment of desperation, I cursed at him, hoping to grab his full attention. Finally, hearing my urgency, he started to trot back, glancing over his shoulder. The light had vanished, but as he made his way toward me, I saw it reappear on the first floor, shining in the very window he had been about to investigate moments earlier. It lingered there, floating in the darkness, and I felt an unsettling presence watching us from within the shadows. When Trevor reached me, he bombarded me with questions, and I gripped his shoulders, turning him to face the light. As soon as he noticed it, the house plunged into darkness. We stood there, breathing heavily, unsure of what had just transpired. I asked Trevor if he had seen it, and he nodded slowly. We now understood that something was definitely inside that house, something that had noticed us. A sense of vulnerability washed over me. The bright moon acted like a spotlight, making me feel as though we were on a stage, observed by whatever lurked within the house. We turned and sprinted back to my house, both of us burdened by a quiet guilt for having ventured where we shouldn't have. The fear of being discovered and the anxiety of facing consequences flooded our minds as we hurried up the porch and pushed our way inside. In that moment, I should have confided in my parents. Even if they didn't see the house, I felt that if I had tried to explain, perhaps a glimmer of my honesty would resonate with them. But I didn't. Neither of us did. We understood that snooping was wrong, and if they believed us, we would surely be in trouble. As Trevor and I settled at the table, which was now laden with hot pies, we exchanged a glance that promised total silence. Our parents inquired about our early return, with Trevor's mother jokingly suggesting that the enticing smell of dessert was the reason. Although I had no appetite and my stomach was a tangled mess of anxiety, I mechanically shoveled steaming cherry pie into my mouth, barely tasting it. I was terrified that they would discover our secret, that whoever was in the greenhouse would suddenly knock on the door and reveal what we had done. It was the irrational fear of a child, the looming dread that haunts every kid's life: the fear of getting in trouble. After we finished eating, I asked my parents if Trevor could spend the night. Following some discussion among the adults, they agreed, even extending the stay to 2 nights. Apparently, Trevor's dad needed to borrow our tractor, but we required it for just a few more days. So, once the tractor was available, my dad would drive it down to them along with Trevor. My fear lessened a bit, as the excitement of having 2 whole nights together began to overshadow my unease. We jumped for joy and cheered, only to be silenced by a bark from my father to settle down. We hurried to my bedroom and started making plans for our time together. With so much time ahead of us, we decided to begin construction on a tree fort in the woods the next day. We made crude sketches in pencil, lying on our stomachs on the floor, our heads bumping together as we crowded around the piece of paper. We spun elaborate storylines about who we were and why we needed a fort, our imaginations conjuring up motives and villains. It was exhilarating, our chatter fueled by the sweet pie, and I felt like I could burst with joy. Looking back, it's one of those rare feelings you only experience as a child, when everything feels perfect, and it's just you and your best friend with the entire world to explore. Eventually, we heard Trevor's parents calling him to say goodbye, reminding him to behave and listen to my mom and dad. As I waited for him to return, I glanced out my bedroom window. The house was gone again. It was midnight. Trevor lay snoring in the sleeping bag my mother had prepared for him, curled up with only his head peeking out. I wasn't sure why I had woken up. The house was silent, my parents long asleep. Even with Trevor there, I felt a sense of fear, as if something else was present in the room with us. I looked toward the walls, the closet, and my cracked bedroom door. Shadows morphed into monsters, only to scatter as my eyes adjusted. I considered waking Trevor, but hesitated, not wanting to be called a chicken again. I felt exposed, as if something was watching me. I glanced toward the window, but only the moonlight filtered through. There were no eyes, no faces pressed against the glass, no candle flickering in the darkness. Just as this thought crossed my mind, a chill ran down my spine. I didn't want to entertain such thoughts in the dark silence. Yet something seemed to beckon me to the window, a physical pull urging me to approach. At first, I resisted, but I knew I wouldn't be able to fall back asleep until I did. Quietly, I slipped out of bed, careful not to step on Trevor's head. I tiptoed toward the window, dread rising like bile within me. With every step, my mind pleaded for me to return to the safety of my covers. The thought echoed in my head. Don't look, don't look, don't look. I reached the window and looked out. My eyes widened, and I felt a scream rising in my throat as I clamped my hands over my mouth. My heart raced wildly in my chest, and I felt a wave of nausea wash over me with gut-wrenching fear. To this day, the memory of what I saw that night fills me with terror. The house was back, standing where it always had, dark and quiet. But something enormous loomed above its rooftop, its head nearly spanning the entire length of the house, with wide, almost human eyes radiating a sick joy. 2 gigantic hands gripped the roof, making it appear as if a child were peeking over a table. The night seemed to glow white, the darkness of its form almost painful to gaze upon. 2 white eyes pierced through its black, human-shaped head, shining like 2 full moons. Its irises glowed a sharp red, almost neon in their intensity. Just visible over the peak of the roof was its mouth, grinning with massive square teeth that seemed to burst from the shadows of its coal black face. They glowed like its eyes, their stark white contrasting sharply with the inky blackness of the rest of its head and hands. I was frozen in place, the entire world melting away like burned wax. My eyes locked with whatever it was, and its smile widened. It never blinked, those two perfectly round, gleaming eyes reaching into my mind and unearthing every fear I had ever harbored. I waited for something to happen, feeling as if I might scream or pass out at any moment. The creature just watched me, its mouth stretched into an enormous grin. Its long black fingers shifted on the roof every few seconds, as if it too were waiting. Then, from the crack in my bedroom door, something called my name. I spun around, a scream already halfway up my throat. Through the partly open door, I saw an impossibly large eye and half a mouth smiling at me, a midnight black hand reaching inside to grip the doorframe. I dove toward my bed, burying myself deep under the covers, shaking and crying. I heard my door creak open and Trevor stirring on the floor. Peeking out from my safe haven, I saw it standing in the entryway, a tall, human-shaped figure. Its skin swirled with dark colors, resembling paint being gently mixed in real time. Its face had the same liquid texture, with one giant eye popping in and out from the surface. The mouth vanished and reappeared, a constant twisted grin emerging from its hideous visage. Then it spoke. Its voice was both singular and many, sounding like a chorus of vocal cords filtered through running water. "Come with us." I shrank deeper into my sheets, every fiber of my being screaming, but the sound was stuck in my throat, choked back by fear. I heard movement followed by a thump, and then a smooth dragging sound. I shifted in my cotton fortress, sweating and trembling, wanting desperately to cry out for my parents. I risked another glance to see if it was gone. My room was empty, and Trevor was gone, along with his sleeping bag. As I tore myself free from my bed, my heart pounding, I heard Trevor in the hallway beginning to wake. I couldn't make out what he was saying, but it sounded garbled and confused. Then his tone shifted, panic blooming like a black rose. I begged my parents to wake, shutting my eyes and wishing it to happen. I heard heavy footsteps and the dragging sound receding down the hall, Trevor's voice growing more vocal and distressed. I heard him begin to cry, his voice soft and muffled. Suddenly, the front door crashed open, causing me to jump and stifle a tiny squeal. Thump, thump, thump. I heard the sounds of the monster and Trevor fading away. I raced to my window, tears welling in my eyes. The monster had Trevor trapped in his sleeping bag, dragging him down the stairs and across the field toward the house. The towering black giant looked down at them, its teeth gleaming in the moonlight, crimson eyes wide with excitement. The creature dragging Trevor didn't look back as it continued its march across the field. I watched as the front door opened on its own, darkness spilling out into the night. Finally, I screamed. I screamed until my voice cracked in high-pitched terror. I heard my parents wake from their room at the back of the house as the monster entered the greenhouse. When my dad charged into my room, I saw Trevor squirming wildly in his sleeping bag, then vanish as the door closed behind him. He was in there, in that terrible house, with that thing. My dad grabbed me by the shoulders, shaking me, asking what was wrong, what had happened. Tears streamed down my face as I took one last look at the house in the field. It vanished. That was 20 years ago. That night, my parents called Trevor's parents and then the police. I described what I had seen over and over, but no one believed me. It was chalked up to a kidnapping, and a thorough investigation was launched over the next few months. Trevor's parents never spoke to mine again. The house never returned, and neither did Trevor. That is, until 2 days ago. I received a phone call at work from the police, informing me they had found someone, a child. They said the child knew me and kept asking for me from his hospital bed. They mentioned that my name was the only thing he would say. I hadn't thought about the house in the field or Trevor in years, but as soon as the officer finished speaking, I knew who the strange child was. Trevor. I rushed to the hospital, my heart a chaotic mess of thunderous beats. Upon my arrival, I was questioned by the cops, who asked for my full name, date of birth, and where I worked. When they seemed satisfied, they told me I could see the child under police supervision. Something felt off, though. They all appeared quiet, shaken. As I was about to enter the room where Trevor was, the officer escorting me placed a hand on my shoulder. He warned me to prepare myself, that what I was about to see might be upsetting. Confused and a little anxious, I pushed through the door. My breath caught in my throat as I beheld what lay in the bed. A child lay above the sheets, his small body rising and falling with labored breaths. His size was the only indication of his approximate age. His entire form, from head to toe, was covered in a pure white glaze. His eyes, mouth, and shiny hairless head, all of it looked like a figure sculpted from snow-white yogurt, but hardened and sleek. His head turned toward me, and then he spoke my name. I recognized the voice instantly, memories of our childhood flooding back like an avalanche of nostalgia. It was Trevor. I approached his bedside, pulling up a chair, my hands trembling as they reached out to touch his. My voice cracked as I said his name, my mouth suddenly dry. I asked him what had happened. This is what he said. Trevor. How long has it been? Me. 20 years. A pause. Trevor. It can't be. Another pause. It will happen soon. Me. What will happen? Trevor. They're coming. Me. Who? Trevor. The Grins. They took my youth away. They will come as children. Me. Are you talking about what happened all those years ago? About the monsters we saw? Trevor. They will come as children. They will come from between the colors. From between the colors. They will come as children. Me. Trevor, please help me understand. Where did you go? What happened in that house? Trevor, voice shaking. They took me between the colors. Took my years away from me. Took all those children's years away from them. All of them. So many houses. So many children. They're ready. They will come now as children. Me. Who is coming? Trevor. The Grins. Me. What does that mean? What are the Grins? Do you mean that thing we saw in the house? Please, help me understand. Trevor, growing frantic. They will walk among us, waiting till they have grown, waiting to reveal themselves. The darkness, red eyes. Oh, such red eyes. They will come as children, and we will see them smile. We will watch them grow. The Grins, they will eat everything. They will eat the world out of existence. At this point, Trevor went into a fit, his body convulsing and gasping. I was quickly shoved out of the room as the nurses rushed in, trying their best to calm him. The cops told me I would need to leave for the day, but that someone would be by to question me. Trevor died later that night. I don't know what happened that night. My friend disappeared into that house. I don't know where he was taken or what was done to him. I'll never know. But what I do know is that it was real. I can't understand it. I can't make sense of it. But that coal black giant with the red eyes, that thing that came into my room, those were real. Trevor's parting words haunted me. They filled me with dread. There was such confidence in them, such sureness. They are ready. They will come as children. As I drove home, I pulled out my phone and called my wife. I needed to know what my son was doing.